Fun is fun, folks, but we've got serious business to attend to.
You don't have to be poor anymore. Jesus is here. The loudspeaker spoke up and said, Christianity is stupid.
Greetings, fellow worker slaves, podcasting at 128 kilobits from the Fortress of Squalitude, not far from the Redneck Mecca. This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznuts is somewhere in the kitchen. Ash, the kitten, and Lord Squeakington are all curled up on my bedroom floor. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and his cats. Get over it. This is a news show episode where I cover stories in the news that are related to things like atheism, secularism, science, or I find just plain interesting. Next episode will be a couple of chapters from the Pistis Sophia, and yes, Skullbeard will be back for that. Well, I'm not going to say my week off was completely wasted, but I didn't get as much done as I would have liked. I had hoped to get on the roof and do some work on it, but it was either too hot or too wet for me to do anything. That also prevented me from taking care of some of the things inside the trailer that need to be done. The main light in the kitchen often doesn't work when it's raining or if it's rained recently. Kind of hard for me to wash the dishes if I can't tell if I've gotten them clean enough because there's no light. It's also kind of hard to sweep and mop the floor under those circumstances. Yeah, I've got a dishwasher, but it's not the best at what it does, so I have to double check everything, which I can't really do without light. I can clean them in the daytime, but something always seemed to come up, so I didn't have much daylight to do the dishes. What? You think I was kidding when I called this place the Fortress of Squalitude? One of the things I've discovered about working lots of hours is that if you let your house get away from you because you don't have a lot of time to take care of it, when you do have the time to do something about it, you face an almost insurmountable task. I did still manage to get a few things done. And one of the things that I accomplished, which I'm proud of, is that I managed to get some of the plants I started replanted into larger pots. One of the things that I have ran into while living here is that the produce variety in even the large grocery stores isn't what I'd like. Even things that one wouldn't consider to be exotic, like banana peppers, can be impossible to find at times. As for something like lemongrass, well, forget it. Nobody, not even the ethnic markets, have it. If I had a car, I could probably find it in an Asian market in Nashville, but I don't have a car. Shockingly enough, I did manage to find a store selling the lemongrass plant. So I bought it. I have that, yellow watermelon, lemon cucumbers, ghost peppers, and let me point out that only very rarely have I ever found yellow watermelon in the stores. The other stuff I've just mentioned, I've never found in the stores. Banana peppers and what I hope is papaya, all growing in pots. In years past, when I've had time, I've had a garden in the yard, but that really hasn't been possible for me to prepare, so I'm having to grow stuff in pots. What some of you are thinking about the papaya, but supposedly it'll grow just fine in large pots. One just has to move them inside during the winter. We'll see how that pans out. The pepper plants, however, are what I'm most interested in. They're perennials in climates where things are warm, which is something I didn't know until a few years ago. And in the past, I've managed to keep a couple of them alive for as long as 5 years, and they would probably still be alive if Houdini hadn't knocked the pots over. I hadn't had the chance to restart growing peppers until now. We'll see how it goes. The really hot weather hasn't hit this area yet, and that's when I tend to lose my plants. Get a few days in the high 90s, and much of the stuff has trouble surviving even if you water it regularly. The nice thing about doing the stuff in pots is that if it looks like we're in for a long, hot spell, I can move the plants to a shady area that might enable them to survive. But the really big news is that I finally came up with a name for the kitten. It took me a long time because I tried to name them after something which matches their personality. The kitten, however, was just a kitten, you know. He did the kinds of things that kittens do and didn't seem to have any odd quirks. So I started thinking about names which could express the essence of him being a kitten without it being something tied to his current age. Kitten works as a name now, but doesn't really make sense when he's about 4 or 5 years old. So my mind drifted to things like Zen Buddhism and the like when I hit upon the name Buddha. I tried it out on the kitten, and he seemed to respond to that, so now he's named. I don't know about you, but it certainly makes me feel better that one of the greatest crises facing our nation has finally been resolved. Okay, I think that's enough of my blathering. Let's get to the news.
I don't do miracles. They're too flashy, and they upset the natural balance.
No miracles, huh? I knew it.
Oh, maybe now and then just to keep my hand in. The last miracle I did was the 1969 Mets. Before that, I think you have to go back to the Red Sea. That was a beauty.
From the independent.co.uk, Pope Francis claims U.S. televangelist performed miracle, paving the way for sainthood. Pope Francis has declared that a late U.S. television preacher once performed a miracle, moving him one step closer to sainthood. The Vatican announced on Saturday the formal approval of the miracle, thought to relate to claims about a baby's extraordinary recovery in an Illinois hospital. The Diocese of Peoria believes that Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen, who died in 1979, interceded in 2010 on behalf of a baby who began breathing 61 minutes after showing no signs of life at birth. One miracle allows a candidate for sainthood to be beatified in the Catholic Church, but a second miracle must be approved in order for sainthood to be conferred. Interestingly enough, I couldn't find anything that explained what has happened to that baby in the years since, and if the child had problems related to their birth. I also couldn't find out if medical personnel were doing anything to save the kid after it was born, or if it just started breathing in the morgue. Those things would actually be kind of important to know if one were to call it a miracle. Additionally, when I was poking around the website the Archdiocese of Peoria had set up about Sheen, I noticed that they were asking for money, not to help fund causes that he believed in, but to handle the costs associated with making him a saint, since, that's what's really important. One of the things that they have to do in order to make someone a saint is they have to get permission from the family to exhume the body, chop off hunks of it, and give them to people to pray over. That's right, in the 21st century, there are people walking around carrying hunks of dead people with them. Not because they're scientists or doctors, but because they think that this will get the dead person's special status in the afterlife. You want to talk about some crazy bullshit? There you go. Oh, and that priest is where Martin Sheen gets his last name from. Now, from abcnews.go.com, we have this. Prominent Detroit priest removed from pulpit. The Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Detroit said Sunday that it removed a prominent priest from public ministry after reviewing what it described as a credible allegation that he had sexually abused a child decades ago. The Reverend Edward Perrion was suspended from ministry Friday, a month after the Associated Press began asking the pastor himself, the archdiocese, and law enforcement authorities about a former altar boy's allegations that Perrion had groped him. Archdiocese officials told Perrion's congregation at Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary Parish during services Sunday that members of the local Archdiocese Review Board found a semblance of truth to the accusations, but that they are maintaining a presumption of innocence. Of course they are. In short, it took a month of questioning by the media before the church took any action at all. So much for the Pope's decree that the Church would have no tolerance for sexual predators. You even hint that a teacher was having inappropriate contact with a student, and that teacher's immediately suspended and put on leave while there's an investigation. Unless, of course, they're a winning sports ball coach. But that never seems to happen with a religious official. Also, according to the article, this priest started a support organization for those in the clergy who were accused of things like sexual abuse back in 2002. You know, just as the spotlight story on abusive priests was hitting the news. Almost as if he was worried about something. And this guy tells a very Trump-esque story in his defense. Supposedly, he had a habit of giving kids wine, which he denies. According to him, there was one time where he was drinking wine with a kid's father, and he asked the dad if it would be okay if the kid had some wine. He claims that it was the kid who refused the wine. It's just all kinds of screwy, if you ask me. Why would he offer the kid wine? I can imagine any number of reasons why the kid would turn it down, but not why he'd offer a minor alcohol. And, you know, that's the kind of story that you tell if you have a guilty conscience. You know, like, when you're, say, a president accused of rape by a woman, and your response is, well, she's not my type. I don't rape women. But she's not my type. Yeah.
Who wants to go down the creepy tunnel inside the tomb first?
From thedailybeast.com, did the Vatican hide art that depicted female priests? For many people, one of the most archaic aspects of the Catholic Church is that it prohibits women from serving as priests. Oh boy. Pope John Paul II ruled in 1994 that the issue of women priests was not open to discussion, and a 2018 essay from the Vatican's doctrinal office reaffirmed the ban. Surprise! The subject is the source of some controversy, with some claiming that church teaching is nothing other than a patriarchal attempt to suppress women. No. One flashpoint in this debate is the history of the early church. Some have argued that as women served in liturgical roles back then, they should be allowed to serve today in some capacity. Now, a respected academic is going one step further and arguing not only that women in the early church were priests, but also that the Vatican deliberately concealed the artistic evidence that would prove it. Art historian Ali Tituins, the author of Mary and Early Christian Women, Hidden Leadership, and a research associate at the Wissengards, I have no fucking clue how to pronounce that, Institute for Catholic Research. So I'm guessing she would not want to come on an atheist podcast to discuss it. Presented a paper on the subject at the International Meeting of the Society of Biblical Literature at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome on Tuesday. Catuz's paper focuses on early Christian artwork that she argues depicts women as priests and even bishops. These images are especially important because of our limited evidence for early Christian liturgy. Examining the three earliest surviving images of Christians worshipping at the altar, two from the 5th century and one from the early 6th century. And holy fuck, is that a hell of a long time worth of artwork to be gone, because you know that as soon as there was a Christian church, people were making art. That's what they do. Catuzes notes that all three artifacts show women by the altar in seemingly official roles. They depict women at the altar in three of Christendom's most important churches: St. Peter's in Rome, the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. It's a really interesting article, and I think pretty much conclusively lays down the case that in the early days of the church, women were actually treated equally before being reduced to subservient roles. And that's a fairly common pattern with new religions, by the way. They start out preaching things like equality for men and women, and may actually practice it for a while, but then soon enough women start getting repressed. If you think that religions are all started by a guy wanting to get a lot of tail, then the whole equality of women starts to make sense. What better way to get women to join your cult than by saying they should all be equal? The reason that they don't stay equal in the cult is because they start getting their own ideas. Like they should be able to have sex with whomever they want, and that maybe men don't have all the answers. And there's photographs of the article of the artworks in questions, and to my untrained eye, I can easily see that, yes, these are women in official roles inside the church. So, I'm no expert, but I'm going to weigh in on the side of the women in this one.
Maybe it's a little early. Maybe the time is not quite yet. But those other worlds, promising untold opportunities, beckon. Silently, they orbit the sun, waiting.
From space.com, NASA is sending a life-hunting drone to Saturn's huge moon, Titan. The space agency announced today, June 27th, that the next mission in its New Frontiers line of medium-cost missions will be Dragonfly, a rotorcraft designed to ply the skies of the huge, hazy, and potentially life-hosting Saturn moon. If all goes according to plan, Dragonfly will launch in 2026 and land on Titan 8 years later. Wow, 2032. I don't even want to think about that. NASA officials said it. The probe will then spend at least 2.5 years cruising around the 32,000-mile-wide moon, making 24 flights that cover a total of about 110 miles. The 10-foot-long Dragonfly will gather a variety of data at each of its stops. Such work will help scientists learn more about Titan, the only solar system body other than Earth known to host stable bodies of liquid on its surface. Titan's surface lakes, rivers, and seas aren't composed of water, however. The frigid moon's climate system is based on hydrocarbons, in particular methane and ethane. Now, while I do think this is cool as fuck, I really don't think it's going to find any life because it's so fucking cold on Titan. I mean, you've got liquid methane and ethane. The mountains, was it the Huygens probe that landed on Titan? I believe it was. Anyways, it sent pictures back from the surface, and you see mountains and landforms. That's water. That's liquid ice. That's water ice, okay? That's making the land. It's not dirt. It's not rock. So I have a hard time believing that any life could evolve on that planet, simply because life needs heat as a source of energy. Forget being able to survive under cold conditions. We know life can survive under very cold conditions. And I wish I could find the piece on it, but it was paywalled, and I've never been able to find an unpaywalled version of the piece. But about 20 years or so ago, New Scientist did a piece about a researcher who had found some microorganisms in Antarctica and was shipping them home to study them. And how they ship them home to preserve them is, they take the vial or that they've got the microorganisms in, and they stick it in liquid nitrogen. That's cold enough to preserve them, and they don't have to worry, for some reason, about the microorganisms freezing and dying. I'm trying to, because if you put, human tissue in liquid nitrogen, it not only does it freeze, it becomes brittle, but even if you put it in there and then pull it out and thaw it, all the cell structures have ruptured. For some reason, with microorganisms, they don't have to worry about that. I don't know if they put in some kind of preservative or what, but they don't worry about it. So she gets the vial back to, I think, the States. Anyways, wherever she's doing her research. And, she knew how many of those microorganisms were actually in the vial before she put it in liquid nitrogen. So when she pulls it out, she figures there should be the same number of microorganisms there. There were more. They managed to divide, because these are single cells that reproduce by fission and not, they're asexual, they reproduce asexually by splitting off. So, there's more of them there than there should have been. And, that's the first time anybody has seen anything like that. Okay. And liquid nitrogen is slightly colder than the average temperatures on Titan. So, yeah, in theory, you could have an organism like that living on Titan. But remember, that organism evolved on a planet which is much, much warmer than Titan is. And the ability to survive such cold temperatures as liquid nitrogen is going to be sort of coincidental. It's not going to be something that nature selected for. And to get something living on, Titan, if it's alive at all, if there's living organisms, they're going to be very slow because they're not going to have a lot of energy. I really lack the vocabulary to express this. I've seen it elsewhere, but basically, if you don't have a lot of energy in a system, then it's hard for things to move. The chemical reactions, for example, are very slow. So the chemical reactions necessary for the formation of life, the amino acids coming together, etc., are going to take a long time to occur. It took on Earth, which is a paradise compared to Titan, 500 million years for life to first evolve. And we don't know how old Titan is. I mean, it could be as old as the Earth, or it might be a little younger. But if on a warm body like the Earth, it took 500 million years for the first life to appear, and you've got a body that is on average 300 times colder than the Earth is, it's going to take a while for the chemical reactions to happen, if they can occur at all. Certain chemicals will not combine once they drop below a certain temperature. So I just don't see it possible for there to be life there. I could be wrong. I actually kind of hope I am. It'd be really fucking cool if, that thing, they have the big, news event, and we're getting the first images beamed back from Titan, and the thing's flying around, and all of a sudden this giant flying monster comes along and eats the fucker. That would be cool as shit, but I bet that won't happen. I bet that place will be just as... It'll look like fucking Mars with water. Only it's not water, it's liquid methane and ethane.
Back off, man. I'm a scientist.
From Vox.com, a math equation that predicts the end of humanity. The most mind-boggling controversy in the contemporary philosophy of science is the doomsday argument, a claim that a mathematical formula can predict how long the human race will survive. It gives us even odds that our species will meet its end within the next 760 years. The doomsday argument doesn't tell what's going to kill us, it just gives us the date, very, very approximately. It starts with Richard Gott III. He's a Princeton astrophysicist, one of the several scholars who independently formulated the doomsday argument in the last decades of the 20th century. Others are physicists Holger Beck Nielsen and Brandon Carter and philosopher John Leslie. In 1969, Gott was a physics undergraduate fresh out of Harvard, spending the summer in Europe. At a visit to the Berlin Wall, he did a quick calculation and announced to a friend, the Berlin Wall will stand at least 2 2/3 more years, but no more than 24 years. Demolition on the wall began 21 years later. This motivated Gott to write his method up. He published it in the Journal of Nature in 1993. There, Gott wrote of the future of humanity itself. He forecast a 95% chance that the human race would cease to exist within 12 to 18,000 years. Some pretty fucking big error bars on that one there. Now, I admit, I don't fully understand this article. I haven't had a chance to really do more than just kind of skim it. And it deals with some complicated mathematical stuff. And my initial assumption was just to dismiss it out of hand. I mean, you know, remember at the beginning of the article, it says, oh, we're going to be wiped out in, 760 years at the latest. And then later on in the article, it says, well, his calculation was that we've got 18,000 years to go. That seems kind of specious of his claim. But then I got to thinking about it. Lots of people dismiss Malthus and his theory. Malthus in the 18th century, 19th century, he got tired of all these people predicting this utopian future and started figuring some things out. And he says, look, here, if we don't get population under control, which they really didn't know how to do back then, we're going to be starving to death by the 20th century. And this put everybody into a panic. Because until that, they had never really thought about these things. And so, because of Malthus's equations and the fact that they were actually correct, people began researching things like refrigeration, canning, improved methods of growing crops, and things like that, birth control. All that started because Malthus says, hey, if we don't figure something out, we're going to wipe ourselves out due to overpopulation. That's lost on a lot of people. They seem to think that he just said, oh, well, there's nothing we're going to do. We're all just going to fucking starve to death. No, his point was to wake people up and to get them to think and say, well, what the fuck should we be doing to prevent this from happening? And I think, I could be entirely wrong with that, I think that's what the purpose of this equation serves. Not that it's actually showing that, we've got 760 years. Oh, and that's the high end for that version of the equation. The low end is like 50, which I'll come back to in a moment. Not that we actually have 760 years, but just that we need to rethink about how our society is, the kinds of things we do, and how to change things so that in 760 years, we're still around. In the 50-year prediction, I cannot find the article, but there was, I just saw it, and I meant to save it, didn't. But I was scrolling around, and I saw a piece that said, basically, if we don't get a handle on climate change in about 50 years, this planet will be largely uninhabitable. And, we don't have to hit really massive temperature rises for it to cause huge problems. I mean, right now, it's 90 fucking degrees in Alaska. There were a couple of days when it was hotter in Alaska than it was here in Tennessee, if you can believe that. I saw a post that showed a temperature sign in someplace in Alaska that said it was 101 degrees. And we haven't hit triple digits here in Tennessee yet this year. We may, because we sometimes do, but we haven't hit them yet. That's a record for Alaska. I'm almost certain of that. 101. Those of you in the civilized parts of the world convert it to Celsius. 101 is roughly 50 degrees Celsius. I don't know about the rest. And it's 100. It's 100 and some degrees in France. And we can handle that, for short periods of time, but you get long periods of time, and that's a real problem. And when I say long periods of time, I don't mean, it's 100 degrees, it's somewhere all year round. No. But, like, my electric bill, when it's really warm, it goes up. Well, I can handle, a couple of days in the summertime where it spikes up to above 100. I can handle the expenses associated with that. But if we get a month where it's 100 plus degrees, I start having trouble paying that bill. Assuming my AC unit will still even work at that point. It's old and it really needs to be replaced, but I don't have the fucking money for it. I mean, a couple of years ago, it was 09? Yeah, it was 09. We had, I think it was 09. Anyways, we had a long spell of triple digits temperatures, and it was like a week. And, it was hotter than fuck in this place with the AC, even with the AC on, and I had my brother come out and we'll check it, and he says, no, it's fine. He goes, it's just not designed to handle this kind of heat. There's nothing you can do, other than get a new unit. I mean, a newer unit would be better able at handling the stuff, but I ain't got the money for that shit. So what the fuck do we do? And so put, a situation where we have people who are like millions of Americans living on the margins, and people in other parts of the world who are living on the margins, and suddenly their electric bills all spike in the summer. Not for 1 month, but for the entirety of the summer. Well, that puts a hurting on them. They have to readjust their lives. Some of them are just going to have to pack up and move. And the more and more frequently that happens, the more and more people have their lives disrupted, and the problems that creates. It's not a good thing, and I don't see a lot of people in power trying to do anything about it. Certainly nobody in the Trump administration. All the more reason for you to vote next time around if you're an American. So again, I just mentioned this because it's important to get us to think. It's important for us to realize that yes, we actually do have the chance of going extinct, and potentially in the near future. We need to be thinking about that, and quite frankly, many of us are not, and certainly not taking it with the level of seriousness that it needs to be examined. I don't have a link to it, but there was actually two stories that tie into this sort of. One is that in 2015, Congress required NASA to start mapping all potential asteroids that could whack the Earth with catastrophic consequences. Well, NASA has come back and said they've done everything they can. They know they haven't found them all, but if they, you want them to be able to find them all, they need money for a new telescope, because current telescopes just don't have the capability to find all the stuff. And I seriously doubt if they'll get that money. Also, what happened here very recently, and this I actually can have a link to, is a couple of hours, there was a asteroid which exploded over Puerto Rico. NASA detected it a couple hours before it hit. That is not yet enough time, if it had been something large enough, to do serious damage, to give adequate warning to anybody. And people think, well, either we're going to get hit by something that's small and therefore we don't have to worry about it, or we're going to be hit by a dino killer and then it doesn't fucking matter. No. I did the math and I can't find it right now, but there was a website that you could plug in various sizes for asteroids and what kind of damage they would do if they hit the Earth. Whether they burn up in the atmosphere or if they'd actually survive and hit the planet and do some damage. And as I recall, it only took an asteroid about 150 meters in diameter, which is still very small, hitting the Earth to cause the same kind of damage as the Fukushima tsunami. Now, okay, we don't have the technology to stop something like that from coming in. But being able to spot it, say, hey, this is headed our way, it's going to hit, say, in Siberia. We know roughly where in Siberia it's going to land. Is there anybody going to be in that area? Let's get them out of there. Let's be prepared for, say it hit, it's going to hit at the edge of Siberia, could either hit the land or hit the water. Well, let's be prepared for tsunamis in Alaska and around, and down along the coasts in Asia. That would be incredibly fucking useful information to have. Like I said, even if we can't stop it, it's good enough. There are ones out there large enough that they could do real damage. And just knowing that, hey, this shit's coming our fucking way. We can't stop it. We don't have the time because, we only spotted it 3 weeks out. But that's enough time to evacuate people from the area most likely to be hit. It's enough time to pre-position supplies to handle the refugees, etc., things like that. And we're not doing it because, nobody likes giving money to NASA for such things, for some silly reason. Okay. Now, everybody knows this, but I'm gonna talk about it for just a minute. This past week, well, of course, was the 4th of July, and the U.S. had its annual celebration of our Declaration of Independence, and we all know what the fuck happened with that as far as Trump's little celebration went. Now, there's an article, and I don't have it. It's another thing I'm rolling through and didn't think to save it, so I can't link to it. But there was a great article I read which explained why Trump said all that weird shit about the fucking airports and shit. They point out that Trump has a huge inability to admit that he's wrong, and that when he's reading from a teleprompter, if he makes a mistake, rather than correcting himself, he just rolls with it and goes on. And if you listen to the audio where he says, the whole thing about they manned the airports or whatever, you can hear him fumble over a word that kind of sounds like airport, but not really. You can't really tell what it is. And then he starts going down that path. And I know, of course, he said, well, it was running this teleprompter, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't explain the other fuck-ups. But the whole business about him fumbling over a word and then continuing makes more sense than, the rain fucking up the teleprompter because, well, it didn't seem to fuck up the rest of the speech. And I get why people, find that so amusing. I really do. But notice what's happened since then. I mean, I want you to think about what was in the news, and on like your news feed on Facebook and Twitter and other social media before that, and what it's been filled with since then. Do you remember? Before that, all our social media feeds, all the news stories we're talking about were the fucking concentration camps on the border. Trump makes his little fuck up, and everybody stops talking about them. Now, I'm not going to claim it was a deliberate plot on Trump's part to flip the news cycle and get people to forget about the whole concentration camp business. Because it's equally plausible to me that the reason his blunder caught fire with people is they needed a relief valve. They needed an escape from the idea that the U.S. has fucking concentration camps on its border, and we're putting innocent men, women, and children in them, and we're doing horrible things to those people inside those camps. And I know there's some debate amongst people about whether or not they're really concentration camps. They are. Okay? They fucking are. And the argument that people will say, well, nobody's being put to death in them in ovens or anything like that. Okay. First of all, the Nazis weren't the only people to build concentration camps during World War II. The U.S. did it. We put a whole bunch of Japanese in them. George Takei was in one. George Takei says what we've got on the southern border are fucking concentration camps. But let's just stick with what the fucking Nazis did, okay? They had built, starting in like 1933, they built concentration camps. Not death camps, concentration camps. What they would do in these concentration camps is they'd put all the quote-unquote undesirables, the Jews, the gypsies, the homosexuals, the infirm, whatever they did not like, they went to those camps. And they did that for years and years and years. And then, they started running into the problem that, these places are starting to fill up. We got to do something. And so they started killing people in those camps. They were lining them up against the walls, shooting them, injecting them with, poison, gassing them. And it's still, and they had problems. One, it was slow and inefficient. Two, the soldiers were tasked with murdering people who were developing PTSD. Imagine that. That's when they began the construction of the death camps. And you could have a concentration camp and a death camp right by one another. In fact, what we think of Auschwitz is not really the death camp. Auschwitz was it was actually a compound with like 5 different camps, and we all lumped them under the name Auschwitz. And some of them were strictly concentration camps where they moved people they didn't like. Others of them were death camps where they brought people that they intended to fully intended to kill, and they did kill them. If you have Amazon Prime or HBO Go or HBO Now, you can also rent it online from Google Play Store, YouTube, Fandango, Vudu, and PlayStation, at least in the U.S. There's a website called justwatch.com. Go there, type in your country, and then type in the name Conspiracy. It's a 2001 movie. It stars, let's see here, Kenneth Branagh, Stanley Tucci, Colin Firth, Tom Hiddleston. It's a whole beautiful cast of actors. It was done in 2001, like I said, by HBO. And it's based on the transcripts, one of the only surviving transcripts of the conference where the Nazis decided how they were going to start mass murdering the Jews. It is, but you know, I mean, they show the Kenneth Branagh's character rolls out the blueprints for Auschwitz, and says, you know, this is what it's going to be, and you know, we have the idea, and it's a mistake, it's a fault of history that, you know, the Germans started killing the Jews immediately, blah blah blah. They didn't, and one of the things this film does, and it dramatizes it, I'm sure, but they have, you know, they had all these arguments. Well, how can we handle the Jews and still obey the law? You know, it's a long argument, heated argument at times. Well, you know, you can't just simply do this. You can't just simply do that. You know, we have to follow the law. Blah blah blah. It just fucking fascinating, in a very macabre sense. But, you know, like I said, I think it was 1933, the Nazis started rounding Jews and the undesirables up and putting them in camps. Those are concentration camps. In 1942, folks, I think it's 42, let me double check. Yeah, 1942 was when the Nazis sat down and said, we've got to figure out how to systematically kill these people. The first camps were not liberated until July 23rd, 1944. That was the first, the first camp to be liberated was Majdanek camp in Poland. And the Soviets did that. It was 1944. The war ended in April 45. The war ended in April 45 as far as the European theater goes, I think. April or May. Okay. So, in 2 years, well, at most 3, depending on how you want to look at it, and depending on things like that. But basically, we'll go the long end for this discussion. 3 years. The Germans went from, we got to figure out a way to mass murder people in a short period of time, to having killed 6+ million people in death camps, that most of which were located either in or next to a concentration camp. These camps that we've got on the border, and I assume I don't have to give you links to the various news stories showing how shitty those places look on the inside. I'll have some in the show notes, but you really should not need them. You should know this by now. They match what the concentration camps looked like before the Nazis started the fucking death camps. And in some rambling and incoherent interview, I'll try and find the article and link to it. I don't watch interviews with Trump, but he just gave one that was rambling and incoherent, as if he could give any other kind, where he was talking and bitching about the homeless and saying we may be looking at doing something about that. The privately run concentration camps on our southern border make almost $800 a day off of each person incarcerated in them. $800 a fucking day. These people don't have toothbrushes. They don't have adequate shower facilities. They don't have adequate food, medicine, none of that. You can stay at a fucking Trump hotel or a lot of fancy hotels for less than $800 a day. I mean, the hotel that the American Atheist Convention in Cincinnati was at Hilton, is one of the nicest hotels I've been in. It's, depending on the time of year, the rates range from like $150 a night to $200 and some dollars a night. Opryland Hotel in Nashville, which is the nicest hotel I've been in. I mean, it's huge. It is a massive, massive fucking structure. They have the largest indoor greenhouse in the U.S., I think, if not the world. It's, the Opryland Hotel's rates are about in line with the that Hilton in Cincinnati. And a Trump hotel room is like $700 a night in New York City, where, hotel rooms are more expensive than they would be anywhere else. So, yes, Fuzz Nuts. Come on, buddy. Come on. There we go. Ouch. Yes, Fuzz Nuts, I hear you. Come on. You have these hotels with first-class amenities that are vastly cheaper than where we're keeping these people. And, this is the hard thing to make the connection on, and I'm going to lay it out. I'm going to talk briefly about it. I'm not going to lay the whole thing out because that'll take a long period of time, so I don't necessarily expect you to believe me on this, but camps like this absolutely can lead to death camps, because we have, these are private for-profit operations in many cases, not all of them, but a good number of them are. And so you have the people in charge of these things, one of whom is Trump's former chief of staff, retired General John Kelly, sits on the board of one of the companies that's running the private concentration camps. They don't think about the people inside the camps. Their focus is on making profits from the camps. And they are doing things in these camps like depriving people of basic amenities because it's more profitable to do it that way. And I'm sure you've seen, please tell me you've seen, I will have links to this in the show notes in case you haven't, the fact that they've found 2 Facebook groups, and there are more, I guarantee you there are more, 2 Facebook groups run by people who are members of the Border Patrol that are just the racist, horrific things you would expect Nazi types to run. And this is all how shit starts getting really fucking ugly, because the Customs and Border Patrol agents who are members of the groups and active participants in them, they are doing these things and saying these things so they can strip the humanity from their victims. Because if they recognize that their victims are human beings with equal rights, they can't do those kinds of things to them. So they have to dehumanize them. They have to refer to their victims as animals, insects, and things like that. Because if they acknowledge the humanity of those they're oppressing, then they cannot be the oppressor, because they'll realize they're the bad guys. And if you allow it to continue, then the step from just concentrating people in these camps to killing those people in those camps is a very, very small one, because you're not mass murdering human beings. You are killing animals. And if you're the executive of a corporation and all you're focused on are things like profits, then you're not focused on the individuals in that organization. Because, you know, the private companies running those camps are not there to serve the people in those camps. They're there to serve the owners of the company and the shareholders. And that means their focus is on profit. And if you're not feeding people, you're making more money. And those who say, well, no, these aren't concentration camps, they're entirely different. I understand their thought processes, because, you know, either they're of the mentality that concentration camps are definitely only places where people are killed, or they're of the mentality that these camps are not set up with the same mindset of, well, we're going to gather all these people from different places and stick them in one area. And that's kind of right, but it's not really, because these are not like refugee camps you will see in other countries, where you have people who just, you know, they're fleeing oppression, and they get to an area and they start a camp there because that's as far as they can go. Or, you know, the government says, you guys can't go any farther. We don't care what you do in this area, but you can't go any farther past this area, so they start up a camp. That's different than what we've got on the border, because the people in these camps aren't choosing to be in this particular spot. They're being forced to be in that spot. The government this has happened under Obama as well as Trump, not nearly as egregiously under Obama as Trump. But we have not been doing the kinds of things at the border to process refugees or people seeking asylum or seeking to immigrate here that we should. There's, in one spot there's a bridge that's the only way you can get from Mexico to the U.S., and instead of having it fully manned so that we can quickly get people across or sort it out, but since Obama, at the, if not even before him, we've failed to properly staff that bridge so that we can process people quickly and rapidly. That's a deliberate effort. And let's just say, hypothetically here, that Trump is not the next Hitler, and that in 2020 we have an election and he loses, and there's no problem bringing in the next Democrat, unless that Democrat makes massive changes to the immigration system, etc., etc. The next Republican who comes to power can easily build upon the foundations that Trump has laid and be a very Hitler-esque like fellow. And I don't know, how likely any of this is. We have, as I've said before, and I'm going to say again and again and again, huge problems in this country that have to be addressed, and unless we get an overwhelming Democratic majority in both houses of Congress, as well as the White House in 2020, 2023 at the latest, we're going to be primed for someone to be a very Hitler-esque like figure in the White House, and we don't want that. And I won't even rule out that person being a Democrat. All right. I need to get out of here. It's starting to get late. I don't want to leave you all on a dark note. So I will put this out there that this lovely pair of Twitter posts by the journalist who goes by the handle Stone Kettle, and they're beautiful ideas, if you ask me. He says, what if we were to pass a law that if in the future it turns out climate change deniers were wrong and their pursuit of profit has ruined our children's world, then their family fortunes are forfeit. Their descendants will be stripped of any wealth acquired through their predecessors' willful destruction of the planet and used to mitigate the disaster for everyone else. Same with corporations. That strikes me as a really fucking great idea. And I share it here, and I'll have a link to the tweet in the show notes so you can share that. But it's proof that not everybody has really bad ideas out there.
That's it for this episode of The Atheist in the Trailer Park Podcast. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, as well as just about anywhere else podcasts can be found. Many of the episodes are also on YouTube. Follow the show on Twitter. @TParkAtheist is the show's Twitter handle. It's on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist.com. If you happen to like the podcast, please rate it on iTunes. If you'd like to support the podcast, there's a donate button on the show notes page. You can support it via Patreon at patreon.com/TNTucker. Thanks for listening.
Say goodnight, Fosnuts.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.
Damned cat.